Everybody remembers the talking donkey. Almost nobody remembers the warnings that came before it, which is a problem, because the donkey is not the point, the warnings are. And this is where the story stops being weird and starts being uncomfortable. A king is desperate, Israel is advancing, fear is growing, and none of those things make a particularly relaxing combination. The king's name is Balak, and lately, every update he receives seems determined to ruin his day. Israel keeps getting closer. Israel keeps getting stronger. Israel keeps doing the exact opposite of disappearing. From Balak's perspective, this is becoming extremely inconvenient. Now, he could try fighting them. That sounds reasonable. It also sounds expensive, dangerous, and potentially embarrassing, especially if it fails. So Balak starts looking for another option, a shortcut, a solution that does not involve thousands of soldiers running toward each other with sharp objects. And that's when he thinks of Balaam. There was something extremely unusual about Balaam. When he spoke, people listened. Not because he was a king, not because he commanded an army, not because he owned half the region. People listened because his words carried weight. His reputation traveled far, far enough that kings knew his name. And when worried kings know your name, it is usually because they want something. Balak certainly does. His message is simple. Israel is the problem. Balaam should help solve the problem, preferably quickly, preferably effectively, preferably without requiring Balak to do very much. Simple, at least from Balak's point of view. But this was never a story about a donkey. It was a story about someone who received enough warnings to stop and kept going anyway. The first warning arrives early, very early, before the famous scene, before the road, before the angel, before the donkey becomes unexpectedly involved in the plot. The answer Balaam receives is clear, not mostly clear, not somewhat clear. The kind of answer that normally ends a conversation, the kind of answer that should prevent future misunderstandings, the kind of answer that should make everyone stand up, say understood, and go home. Instead, the story continues, which tells the audience something important immediately. The problem was never confusion. Nobody forgot the answer. Nobody lost the instructions. Nobody accidentally deleted the message. The warning was received, the warning was understood. The warning was simply not appreciated, because desire has a remarkable ability to negotiate with reality. Some people need a sign. Balaam was about to collect them. It's like ignoring 10 red alerts from your bank and being surprised when your account gets frozen. The alerts are not hiding. The alerts are not speaking in riddles. The alerts are practically screaming. But once people become attached to a certain outcome, warnings suddenly start sounding more like suggestions. And this is where the real story begins. Not with a donkey, not with a miracle, not with a strange conversation on a road. It begins with a warning, a clear warning, a simple warning, a warning that should have ended everything before it started. Instead, it becomes the first step toward a situation that gets stranger, more awkward, and much harder to defend. And Balaam is about to receive the first warning. The strange part? Balaam wasn't confused. That would have made this story much simpler. Confusion is understandable. Confusion happens. People misunderstand instructions every day. People misunderstand directions every day. People even misunderstand messages that literally begin with the words "do not." Humanity has an impressive track record in that department, but confusion was not the problem here. Balaam knew. The first answer had been clear, very clear. The kind of clear that normally settles things, the kind of clear that should have ended the entire story before anyone started packing for a trip. Instead, the story continues, which immediately tells the audience something important. The problem wasn't information. The problem was what Balaam wanted the information to become. Because not long after the first answer arrived, more messengers showed up. More important messengers. More impressive messengers. More persuasive messengers. And perhaps most importantly, messengers carrying a much more attractive offer. Balak had decided that if the first request didn't work, he would simply make a bigger request, with bigger rewards. Because when a problem refuses to disappear, people often assume money might help. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it creates entirely new problems. This story eventually chooses the second option. The messengers arrive. The offer is presented. The pressure increases, and Balaam asks again. Now, technically speaking, asking again is not always a bad thing. Sometimes asking again is reasonable. Sometimes asking again is wise. Sometimes asking again prevents disasters. This is not one of those times, because Balaam already knew the answer. The audience knows he knew, the story knows he knew, and deep down, Balaam knows he knew, which makes everything that follows increasingly awkward. Some people need a sign. Balaam was collecting them. He receives a warning, then another warning, then confirmation, then more confirmation. At this point, the warnings are starting to form a pattern, a very obvious pattern, the kind of pattern that usually appears right before somebody ignores it. It's like receiving 5 emails titled, "Do not do this," and responding, "Interesting, I'll think about it." The strange thing is that Balaam never appears lost. He never appears confused. He never appears unable to understand the situation. If anything, he understands it unusually well, which is exactly what makes the story uncomfortable, because most people expect bad decisions to come from ignorance. They expect mistakes to happen because someone lacked information, but many of the worst decisions happen after the information arrives, after the warnings arrive, after the signs arrive, after the answers arrive. And desire has a remarkable way of changing how those answers sound. A warning becomes a possibility. A boundary becomes a discussion. A clear answer becomes something that might still be negotiable, not because reality changed, because desire did. The problem wasn't lack of information. The problem was desire. And desire has a way of making warnings sound optional, which would become a serious problem very soon, because the warnings were about to get louder, much louder, and the next one would be impossible to miss, at least in theory. And this is where everything should have stopped. Seriously, this would have been the perfect moment, the ideal moment, the completely reasonable moment, the moment future historians would point to and say, that was the exit. But Balaam keeps going. The journey continues, the mission continues, the warnings continue. And that turns out to be a problem, because the strange thing about warnings is that they usually become louder over time. They start small, then they get clearer, then they get harder to ignore. Then they start standing directly in front of people, which is roughly where this story is heading. Balaam begins traveling. The destination is waiting. The rewards are waiting. The opportunity is waiting, and so is the next warning. Warning keeps going. Warning keeps going. Warning keeps going. At this point, the pattern is becoming difficult to miss. Not impossible, just difficult. Human beings have accomplished impressive things throughout history. Ignoring obvious patterns is one of them, because when people want a certain answer badly enough, they can turn almost any warning into background noise. The warning isn't rejected, it isn't debated, it isn't even denied. It simply gets moved to a corner of the mind where inconvenient information goes to wait, sometimes permanently. It's a surprisingly popular storage system, and Balaam seems to be using it. The signs keep appearing, the message keeps repeating, the situation keeps escalating, yet the journey keeps moving forward. It's like driving with the check engine light on for 6 months. At first it's alarming, then it's concerning, then it's annoying. Eventually it becomes part of the dashboard decoration, and suddenly everyone is shocked when the car stops working. The warning didn't fail, the warning was promoted to furniture. And that's what makes this chapter uncomfortable. Because Balaam is not acting like someone who never received a warning. He's acting like someone who received enough warnings to become familiar with them. There's a difference, a very important difference. One comes from ignorance, the other comes from repetition. And repetition can be dangerous, especially when nothing bad happens immediately. Because immediate consequences are easy to understand. Touch fire, get burned, simple. Delayed consequences are much harder. They create confidence. False confidence, the kind that whispers, "See? Nothing happened." At least not yet. And not yet has rescued many bad decisions from being questioned. For a while. Meanwhile, the road continues. Balaam continues. The mission continues. Everything appears normal, which is often how problems prefer to look right before they stop looking normal. Then something unusual happens. Something sees danger before Balaam does. Something notices what he doesn't. Something recognizes what everyone in the audience already suspects. The warnings have not disappeared. They've been getting closer. And now the story is about to become extremely awkward. Because the next character to understand what's happening is not a king, not a prophet, not a messenger, not an expert. It's a donkey. And that's when the story gets really awkward. Now comes the part everybody remembers. Finally, the donkey. The scene that somehow became more famous than everything leading up to it, which is a little unfair because by this point the warnings have been working overtime, but now the story reaches its most famous moment. Balaam is traveling. The road stretches ahead. The destination remains the same, the mission remains the same, and so does the problem. Then the donkey stops. Just stops. No announcement, no explanation, no helpful presentation outlining its concerns. Just a complete refusal to continue, which immediately creates a problem. Not for the donkey, for Balaam, because Balaam has a schedule, a destination, a plan, and nothing disrupts a plan faster than a donkey that suddenly decides the plan is terrible. Eventually the journey resumes, for a moment. Then the donkey stops again, and then again. At this point, a pattern is beginning to emerge. A pattern everyone seems capable of seeing except the person who needs to see it most. The donkey sees something, Balaam doesn't. The donkey reacts, Balaam doesn't. The donkey changes course, Balaam doesn't. The donkey is rapidly becoming the most cautious character in the story, and probably the smartest, which is not a sentence Balaam would have enjoyed hearing. At this point, the donkey has become the smartest character in the story, and that is not usually the role assigned to the donkey. The strange thing is that people often focus on what happens next. The miracle. The famous moment. The conversation. But the miracle isn't that the donkey speaks. The miracle is how much Balaam ignored before that happened. Warning after warning. Opportunity after opportunity. Chance after chance to stop. And somehow the most famous miracle in the story only happens after all of those are ignored. Which feels important. Because the story is quietly making a point. The issue was never visibility. The issue was willingness. Balaam wasn't lacking information. He was resisting conclusions, and those are very different problems. The irony becomes difficult to miss. Balaam is famous for seeing things other people don't. That's his reputation. That's why kings seek him out. That's why Balak called him. Yet the man famous for seeing what others couldn't is the last one to see what is directly in front of him. It's like being the cybersecurity expert who clicks the scam link, or the driving instructor who forgets where the brakes are. The expertise isn't the problem. The confidence is. And confidence can become surprisingly expensive, especially when warnings have been ignored for long enough. Meanwhile, the donkey continues doing something remarkable. Not speaking, not yet. Something even more remarkable. Paying attention. The danger is still there. The warning is still there. The message is still there. The donkey simply responds to it, which turns out to be more than can be said for Balaam. And now the title finally starts proving itself, because this was never really about a talking donkey. It was about a man who kept moving forward long after the warnings started telling him not to, and the consequences are about to become impossible to ignore. So no, this was never a story about a talking donkey. That's just the part everybody remembers. The real story was about warnings. A warning, then another, then another, then another. An opportunity to stop. An opportunity to stop. An opportunity to stop. And Balaam kept going, which is what makes the story uncomfortable, because Balaam wasn't destroyed by lack of guidance. He was nearly destroyed by ignoring it. The answer was there. The exit was there. Balaam kept looking for another answer. The problem wasn't confusion. The problem wasn't lack of information. The problem was desire. And desire has a remarkable ability to make warnings sound negotiable. That's why this story still feels familiar. The details are ancient. The behavior isn't. The most dangerous decisions rarely happen without warnings. They happen after them, after the hesitation, after the advice, after the red flags, after the opportunity to stop. That's what makes them dangerous, not the absence of guidance, the rejection of it. Which brings the story back to the donkey. The donkey wasn't the strange part. The strange part was how far Balaam went after being told not to. The donkey saw the danger. The warnings revealed the danger. Balaam kept moving toward it. And that's the part most people forget, not the donkey, the warnings, because in the end, this was never a story about a talking donkey. It was a story about someone who received enough warnings to stop and kept going anyway. Which Bible story should I simplify next? Saul was chosen, but lost. Everything Samson saw, the trap, and walked into it. Jonah ran away, but not for the reason you think.